think, did you say 50? We need more like a 50-50 balance with the 6s and omega-3s?
Yeah, 50-50. So as we set a tone with our diet, with the omega-3, omega-6, we're setting a tone inside of ourselves. Mm-hmm. And so again, a cell is going to try to react when something happens. If that cell only has inflammatory, basically, resources, then it's going to inflame, right? And it's going to have trouble dialing back that inflammation, and it's going to have trouble healing.
It's nice to see you again.
Yeah, well, good to see you too. And it's nice to be back, and nice to have another exciting, interesting conversation with you. So.
Right. And I mean, I know that all my listeners, I got quite a bit of response and interest. Questions that people that I know, as I go with my clients and all around the neighborhood and all that kind of stuff. But so thank you. That was great. Episode 35, the endocannabinoid system. And, as we mentioned, you mentioned I can't remember how we came across that term, frequency technology. And so can you remind myself and the viewers and where we kind of left off, and if it's related or how that you utilize it?
Yeah, so frequency is there's lots of interesting ways, let's say, to measure the human body. And right now, we use things like MRIs and PET scans and, CRT devices and all that stuff in the medical system. Those are very big, expensive, complicated devices. Mm-hmm. We use a little device in our clinic. Now, it's not a diagnostic, and I could never, even if I was a doctor, I could never diagnose a disease in you from the information mm-hmm. in this frequency machine. But basically we have a bioresonance frequency scanner, and what this thing does is, if you think about it, every organ in your body would have a different kind of core or fundamental frequency. So the heart would be different than the kidneys because of their shape and their water content, and how quick they're mitochondrially pounding away and all those type things. So each organ would have a different frequency, in each tissue system, and literally almost down to every different cell type would have a different frequency. And so this machine will analyze that, and then it looks at deviations. So if you're right on that core frequency, then that's a pretty healthy system or organ. If you're off that core frequency, that means something. That means some dysregulation. And so they've just built a big database of kind of what that dysregulation is. But the best thing that it'll do is it sees the frequencies of like pathogens. So a bacteria, a fungus, parasite, or an bacteria, fungus, parasite, virus, or virus. And I can see those in organs. I can see those indicated, let's just say, in organs or, other areas, right? And that's extremely useful. Like if I get an idea that you have, let's say, hookworm and pinworm in your gut, which most of us have, probably 95% of the people that I scan have some form of hookworm and pinworm, that means you need to deworm. If we find something like H. pylori, that's a very aggressive cancer-causing bacteria. And again, that's a different kind of, let's say, method to get rid of that guy. But that's something that we need to be able to let people know, hey, it looks like you might have H. pylori.
So curious, like almost a layman's question. So when you do this frequency and you can target organs?
Yeah.
And then is there any baseline? Like, is there like are you looking for some kind of a disruption? How do you find the maladies again? Like, how is that just...
So let's back up.
Okay.
So let's back up and let's talk a little bit more about kind of what's going on in a system, right? So in a system you have cells, and so let's just say it's your heart, for argument's sake. But you have cells, heart cells, that all glom together, and they decide to form a collective, right? Which is kind of interesting. How do those cells even know to, hey, I'm a heart cell, I want to join with you, another heart cell? Endocannabinoid, by the way. But that's how things understand, hey, I'm going to join the collective. I'm going to be a part of, let's say, the overall heart. Then based on metabolic rate, so again, you've got a metabolic rate that's associated with your heart, like how quick are your mitochondria making ATP? And that depends. That depends on your diet. That depends on your omega-3, omega-6 content. It depends on whether you're fasting and fed. But that goes into a core frequency of that heart. And then that can change based on disease or, dysregulation. But most of the things that happen to us on the inside of us, and again, you can think of your body as a big symphony, right? So the hearts are playing a tune, the lungs are playing a tune, the kidneys are playing a tune. Everything kind of has a contribution. Your endocannabinoid system would be like the conductor, in the whole symphony. When you have infection or you have, let's say, inflammation, oxidative stress, that's like static in the machine, okay? So it's like static in the symphony. And again, that static is somewhat measurable by this, frequency scanner, and that static and how it's affecting organs is somewhat measurable by the frequency scanner. But that static is what causes really disease. It causes, if you look at something like, let's say, seizures, all right? What happens in a seizure? Why, does God just decide one day, hey, your nerves are not going to work, you're going to have seizures? No, it doesn't work that way, right? It basically takes dysregulation in those nerves, and that dysregulation causes those nerves to pull in their endocannabinoid, let's say, walkie-talkies, and say, I'm going to be kind of on my own. And when cells are on their own and don't communicate, you get things like seizures or neuropathy or, other issues. So frequency is absolutely the future of medicine and future of diagnostics. There's no question.
Wow. So that kind of little chaos and that disruption where they're not communicating as good as they should, and that's ultimately being affected by lifestyle, diet, and environmental circumstances of everything we consume.
Yeah, all the way down to, again, that we probably talked about this last time, but the two most important foods that you eat every day are omega-3 and omega-6 fats, okay? Mm-hmm. And why are they important? Well, they're the master precursors for your endocannabinoid system. They, are master precursors for your immune system. They are just the two most, by far and away, two most important things that we eat every day. And in fact, if I took a cell out of you, Greg, I could tell you exactly the ratio of omega-3, omega-6 that you consume.
You can do that right now?
Yeah, that's reflected in every single cell wall, okay? So it's every cell wall will reflect your ratio of omega-3, omega-6 consumption. Now, when a cell gets ready to do something, so again, cells are kind of like people, right? And so if the cell's not threatened and he's got everything he needs, he's going to do his work and kind of perform the way that he should. But if a cell begins to get threatened, like with oxidative stress or something like that, some, environmental cue, he's going to start pulling stuff from his cell wall. Okay. So he's pulling stuff from his cell wall. And if you have 40 omega-6s to 1 omega-3, he's going to be pulling 39 omega-6s and 1 omega-3. And most of the stuff that you need to resolve inflammation comes from omega-3s. And so he's going to have to struggle like crazy to find that 1 omega-3 to be able to build resolvins and protectins and all the things that he needs to be able to heal. So that's kind of the state that we're in right now. And that's why we're all so tweaky and inflammatory. And, 80% of us will die of an inflammatory disease. I had this really interesting thought this morning. I'm convinced that we used to live a lot longer than we do now. Okay. So I think we had this figured out, and I think, probably we had it figured out in Egypt, right? But if you go back and you look at ancient Egypt and, how long was the normal person's lifespan? It's, 30 something years. And it's like, whoa, we didn't have anything figured out at all. Either that or they were all killing each other. Right. But it occurred to me this morning that is the physiological age of the bodies that they're digging up. That doesn't mean that that's the chronological age of the bodies at all. So what if you lived to be 300 years old, but you had a body of a 30-year-old? And I truly think that they had it figured out. Really? To that degree. Yeah, I really do. Yep.
That's fascinating. And so that just kind of like a little bit. But it's a, it's an interesting theory, right? It's a theory at this point, right?
Oh, absolutely. Yeah, it's
Right.
just it's more of a thought exercise, really.
Yes.
I'm convinced that we have figured all this out before. I'm convinced that we've kind of, if you're a Christian, we've had the 1,000-year reign, so to speak.
Yes.
I'm pretty convinced that we've fallen rather than we're continuing to
Oh, I
rise.
see. I see. So
Yeah.
we are kind of like been on a steady decline, and assuming that.
Well, yeah, I think we could probably got, reset sometime. So,
Yeah.
and I don't know when, but 1800s probably is what it's looking like. But certainly you can see evidence of that with the takeover of medicine that happened with the Flexner Report in the early 1900s and a
Hmm.
bunch of other stuff. For whatever reason, these people that want to, enslave us and rule over us really want to break our connection with the land, right? So they really want to break the indigenous people's connection with the land. And so I think kind of the last of the Indians here in the United States was kind of the end or beginning of that reset, let's say. So,
It's interesting you mentioned that because I'm just obviously I'm an observer of social media, and there's a lot of American farmers that are almost, there's these documentaries out there that they're almost like they're almost positioned and like been operating like they're not quite criminals, but working underneath the radar and kind of like going their natural way, and it's slowly coming out. And there's there's a Carbon Cowboys organization and all kinds of interesting films and stuff. I can't name the one out. But anyway, it's like you said, we're talking about the big system as a whole, and so what are we consuming every day? What are all those details, in the air and what foods and all that kind of stuff. So, Chip, how is it at all being used right now in our existing healthcare system? The frequency technology,
oh,
how's it being applied at all?
yeah. Well, you can look at an EEG and, things like that, electroencephalograms, the muscle kind of, there's a muscle, frequency kind of thing that works. So there's if you really look at how, let's say, an MRI works, an MRI is really working, through frequency. It's basically detecting things, in a chick, 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 chick way, and then it's building kind of an image of that. In fact, if you ever had an MRI, you can hear it chonk, chonk, chonk when it's imaging you.
So is there another level of this, like the frequency technology you're talking about? Is there another level coming that's even above the capabilities of
Oh,
MRIs?
yes.
Okay, this is why we're having this conversation.
Yeah.
Yeah.
So again, if and you have to look at things kind of organ by organ. I
Yes.
couldn't hit you, let's say, with one frequency and then, absolutely, heal you. You've got to look at organ by organ. But an organ wants to be at a specific frequency. And again, if an organ is off that frequency, that means something. You can train, just like, have you ever seen the tuning forks, where you have
Yes.
an A, and then the A will resonate kind of in sympathy with that? Well, again, that happens. So if I hit your heart with the appropriate frequency, it's going to try to begin to sympathetically resonate with that proper frequency rather than the frequency that it's on. Okay. Now, could there be harm in that? Yeah, absolutely, because the heart is off frequency for a reason. So you have to find that underlying reason. And that underlying reason almost is always some kind of infection, right? And that infection could be in the gut that affects, the entire systemic body, right? It could be in a lot of different places. But we need to understand our inputs. We need to understand kind of what happens inside of us. We need a clean system. And then when we have a clean system, we should be able to manipulate that system.
Am I correct in thinking that the technology is going to help us micromanage more efficiently in the big picture of things of like both diagnosis and treatment?
Well, consider, if everything in you was healthy, right? Would you age? No, not really. Would you get sick? No, not really. I mean, there might be some superbug that could come along that could, punch through our maximized, let's say, immune system, but it's unlikely. It's very unlikely. So we suffer right now because we don't understand how to work our immune system. Because we don't understand how to work our immune system, we get infected with things. And again, most of us don't even think this way, but I'm
Right.
telling you the truth, I promise you. So we get infected with things, but those infections will cause systemic other things. So like RA is it's not an infection in the joints. it extends to the joints. It's an
Rheumatoid
infection.
arthritis.
Yeah, it's an infection that can go, can be housed in other places, but that affects the joints, right? Even if something like acne, acne is directly related to the gut biome. So, so it doesn't really matter what the symptom is. Now, this is outside, let's say, trauma and acute care. So this is just, kind of general health symptoms, symptoms arise because of these infections. But when you have infection inside of you, you're off the core beat, right? And again, if my heart decides to, adipose tissue is the easiest way to understand this, because we all understand that we're obese, that we're, as a population, we're
Too
type
well
2
fed.
diabetic. Yeah, and we eat too frequently.
Or I would say too heavy amount of calorie, right?
Yeah, but we eat too frequently, and we don't really understand, the consequences of eating. But when we're eating, again, it's very important that our adipose tissue, so like our fat tissue, can communicate with our liver, with our pancreas, with our, let's say, digestive system, and also our hypothalamus hippocampus. Now, what happens when this static or infection gets too bad is, again, these cells just decide, hey, I don't want to be a part of the collective anymore. I'm just going to pull in, and I'm going to kind of, hunker down.
Too much.
Yeah, I don't like this environment much.
Is it almost like on a cellular level, that cell is like going to try to go, oh, I'm done. I'm going to try to protect my own self. And then all of a sudden he breaks away from the group, or like that type of thing?
Let me circle back to that.
Yes.
So, but in adipose tissue, if adipose tissue decides, hey, I don't want to communicate anymore, I don't want to play anymore, it's going to go to default mode, which is type 2 diabetic, and it's going to store fat. So cells, if they get sort of cut off from the collective, they're going to go to their default mode, and that default mode, like for instance with adipose tissue, that's not healthy. We're just going to get fatter and fatter and fatter and fatter.
Right.
But back to your question, so a cell, it's more like a system. So it's that cells more operate systemically, but you can think of them as little individuals. But, if the system is threatened, then those cells have all kinds of different protection mechanisms, just like, we would. So do we get out the 12-gauge shotguns and lock all the doors, or what do we do, right? So in those threats, though, to a cell could be environmental. So it's, you could walk over a lead mine, you could, walk into a plutonium factory. But for most of it, it's infection driven. So it's some kind of infection that is threatening basically the environment of cells that causes them to disconnect from the collective. And that's what disease is.
And can I tie that back into, because this big emphasis on when you record so graciously episode 35 from me about the endocannabinoid. So this all gets back to, again, that ratio of those fats, omega-3s and 6s, to we're just so heavy on the 6s, again, that causes so much more the inflammation aspect of it, and that we're out of balance. And is it true? I think, did you say 50? We need more like a 50-50 balance with the 6s and omega-3s?
Yeah, 50-50. So it's basically what happens is we set a tone with our diet. With the omega-3, omega-6, we're setting a tone inside of ourselves. And so again, a cell is going to try to react when something happens. If that cell only has inflammatory, basically, resources, then it's going to inflame, right? And it's going to have trouble dialing back that inflammation, and it's going to have trouble healing because it doesn't have the resources it needs. And so that's really the state that most of us are in right now, is we have this horrible, almost like a, pouring gasoline on a fire, situation that's going to get kind of way out of control, where we should be like kind of pouring wax on a fire where it, slowly goes out. Right. So
like try to, what do you call it? Negate the fuel or the chaos in this point, right? Kind of like a chaos in the body.
Yeah. So, I'll give you an example of this omega-3, omega-6. So, and again, this is how we need to understand how to work our immune system, first of all. We need to understand our shields. And again, when you eat a meal, your shields go down for 5 hours, all right? And that could be 50 calories. That could be just a little bit of protein or a little bit of fat. Whoop, no shields. You're 50 times less what you were before you ate. You have 50 times less of an immune system. You know, you've got no way to kill cancer in a fed state. You got 2 ways in a fasted state. So the first thing that we need to do is understand the consequences of eating, right? So when we eat, we go into a degraded state for 5 hours. So in a perfect world, you know, we would be eating probably not even every day. You know, we would be eating, you know, at most once a day. We would be packing, you know, all those calories into one, you know, period. So we just kind of have that 5-hour downtime and that's it. So that's working, let's say, our immune system. And again, we want to be in that fasted state because we're so much stronger. And again, I'm going to beat a lot of pathogens when I'm in a fasted state. I'm not going to beat very much of anything when I'm in a fed state. So we're kind of in an open book, let's say, for infection and things like that when we're in this fed state. But now let's talk about what we eat. And again, omega-3, omega-6 is the easy way to start. Now there's other things, and if we want to go through the taxonomy, we can, of what's important. But omega-3, omega-6. So if I eat them in balance, I set a real loose and dynamic situation in my immune system. So I can have an event, I can inflame a little bit, I can deal with that event, I can heal that, and I can kind of come back to normal. And that's the way that we should be. So let me give you an example of that. Let's say you're allergic to dust. Let's say you have a dust allergy. And so and I'm feeding you equal amounts of omega-3, omega-6, okay? So we drive into a dust storm, you and I. You're horribly uncomfortable in the dust storm, but as soon as we get out of the dust storm, whoop, you return right back to normal, okay? That's eating equal amounts of omega-3, omega-6. Let's say I feed you what we're eating right now, 40 omega-6s to 1 omega-3. Now I can't even drive you through a dust storm because I might kill you. You might go into anaphylactic shock, okay? It's that severe. And when you have one dust mite, okay, not even a dust storm, not even anything like that, one dust mite is going to cause you this huge overreaction that you're going to get stuck in, okay? That's where most of us are right now. Now,
Almost like so weak and sensitive, right? Like the body's so weak and sensitive at that point.
It's like having a castle and your shields are down, so all your castle walls are down, so all these bugs and all these infections are coming in, and then you've got these super overworked soldiers that don't know anything to do but, you know, fire their flamethrowers. I mean, that's pretty much what's going on right now. You know, in a perfect world, we close those gates, we don't let all those pathogens in, and we calm down the flamethrowers, right? And those flamethrowers cause huge amounts of unintended harm. So, you know, pain is associated with this ratio, all right? So if you hurt, you hurt because you have too many omega-6s over omega-3s, and you can't mediate that pain because of a lack of omega-3s.
So, so immediately the most common thing that's probably talked about as we age, and everybody says, that just comes with age, is different forms of arthritis. Uh-huh. Now, I'm assuming that there's still some genetic levels of disposition on when somebody's really going to suffer from it. Say they're eating a terrible, heavy omega-6 diet, not have enough threes. Is one person going to be more likely to suffer from the different types of arthritis? And how's that wash out?
It looks like you break along your genetics. Okay. So, you're a system. If I stress your system, you're going to somewhat break along your genetics. And so, and it could break around, lack of nutrient and kind of, environment too, but mainly genetics. And so, what happens in something like arthritis, well, again, in any organ, tissue, system failure, what happens is this, and again, God is a perfect engineer, all right? And you're constantly remaking your cells. You don't make bad cells, so there is no bad Greg cell that gets made, okay? So you might have something happen to those cells right after they get made, and that happens, but you don't make bad cells. You make perfect cells. You make cells that are ready to rock and roll. They're ready to do whatever service, you're making them for. So you make perfect heart cells. You make perfect nerve cells. You make perfect, arthritis killing cells, you make perfect immune cells. But things happen to those cells after we make them. And what mainly happens, again, our system is always striving toward perfect. Everything in this body is always striving toward healing, toward perfect function, toward perfect form. So if I'm not doing that, then there's some other reason. And, for what we're seeing, that's mainly infection. It's mainly infection.
Okay. So on that cellular level, does the body start to decline the quality ability to repair? And is it naturally, or is it directly related to, obviously, what we're talking about now, that balance of...
So you have kind of let's say you're, kind of like a car, let's say would be the, best way to describe it. And, but you're like a perpetual car. You're like a car that's always rebuilding its engine, a car that's always rebuilding its exhaust, a car that's always rebuilding its electronics. So you're constantly in a rebuilding, but that rebuilding is perfect. Those cells are perfect. So, what happens? So why do we age? Why do we decline? It takes something. And again, for most of us, that is infection. So people don't, my dad died of a heart attack. That's what it says on his death certificate. He did not die of a heart attack. God didn't just decide one day. His name was Homer, so thank God he didn't call me Bart. But
I bet you use that one for a lot.
But God didn't just decide one day, Homer, I'm going to have your heart stopped today, right?
Yeah.
It takes years and years and years of stress and abuse. What causes that stress and abuse? Infection. So dad probably died of a 30-year hook around and pinworm infection. He didn't die of a heart attack. His heart failed because of the infection, and that's what went on his death certificate, but that isn't what killed him. The infection killed him. Yeah.
So what other major players right now, like researchers like yourself, are dedicating their, time into this frequency technology? It's like it's a scanner, right?
Yeah. And I would say, the frequency technology, I'm kind of a weird guy, right? I'm out kind of tip of the spear in this endocannabinoid system and omega-3, omega-6 and kind of human function. And, on my island out here, there's a few of us out here, let's say. So, Michael Levin would be the best guy, I would say, and you're not going to find Michael Levin frequency. You're going to find Michael Levin biofield. But that biofield is kind of a higher order of things than, let's say, the endocannabinoid system. So the endocannabinoid system is going to run and kind of manage the body, and it's going to be kind of the chief operating officer, let's say, of the body. It's going to be involved in almost everything, and it's going to make decisions and kind of try to optimize you. But it doesn't really tell you where your heart goes in your morphology, or where your lungs go in your morphology, or how cells divide and things like that. That is more called the biofield. And Michael Levin is a researcher in the biofield, and he's at Tufts University. There's another researcher named Irina Kosak, and she has come up with something called the resonant recognition model of physics. And it postulates that basically you have a very physical way that you can run, so enzymes and, basically those type chemical reactions, but you also have a very ethereal way that you can run with frequency. So I can physically dock a ligand to a receptor, and that's going to cause action, or I can do that in frequency, and that will cause action. And they proved this out. They proved you can block a receptor. They proved you can mimic a ligand. So it's pretty cool. But that's pretty, it's 15-year-old science.
So is that in a state of, when that's this whole process you're describing and what they're discovering? Is they just still trying to put their head around the potential and how the application for practical, everyday use, or?
No. It's, at some level we know about this. Again, Why doesn't it bubble up? Well, it doesn't get NIH funding. It doesn't get NSF funding. It doesn't get, and so the people that make those decisions are, again, this threatens pharma. How much does an MRI cost? Yeah. And the frequency scanner that I have is $4,000.
Okay.
Okay.
and you're empowered to go and use that, like, right, really, and you're finding it's beneficial for your practical applications as you're treating people.
Again, I can't, make any claims about it, but
Right.
it gives me super good information, or the person that I'm looking at, really good information about what potentially could be going on inside of them. And, as we have, let's say, played that out, okay, well, you have, let's say, H. pylori, which is a bacterium. And then I hold patents around, our natural products. I hold patents around my ability to basically, formulate into the human body. And so we can formulate something that will go at that particular thing that we think is there, that we see indicated on the machine is there. And pylori is something that you'll know it if you have it. If you have, acid reflux, GERD, burping, any of that kind of stuff, you likely have H. pylori. And again, we'll, give them the supplement, and all that will go away, and they'll come back, and we'll put them back on, and informationally we'll see that they don't have H. pylori anymore. So that happens, every day in our world, every single day. And I have to be very careful about that, because again, that threatens a big entrenched system that's worth a whole lot of money.
Right.
I'll give you an example of this diabetes, so type 2 diabetes. We've known for years that intermittent fasting and basically, correcting your diet will cure you of type 2 diabetes. Now, why isn't the CDC, why is that on the CDC's website? Why isn't HHS talking about that every day? I mean, we've known that for a long time. Why? Because why don't they? It threatens $160 billion a year industry that they're, co-opted in.
I would tell you, Chip, it's amazing because, I've been a fitness professional for over 30 years, and I started working out and investigating and reading probably 40 years ago.
Yeah.
And, I heard it was called type 2 diabetes, adult onset. And it was just from the abuse and wear and tear. And I come to understand that it's completely controllable, right? It's completely avoidable, type 2.
It's really interesting. So it's looking like now, and this is the nice thing about having this dang frequency scanner, is I get to make these associations, and I'll start writing some of this up at some point, but I need a diagnostic piece of equipment rather than the frequency scanner to validate this, and that way I've got kind of a real diagnostic that I can write about. But we see something called Lactobacillus acidophilus, which is most people think of he's a good bug. He's a good bacterium that lives in the biome. Mm-hmm. We see him associated with lots of obesity, and we see him associated with lots of type 2 diabetes. Mm. And again, he's modifiable by diet, so you can quit eating fermented food and quit taking probiotics that all have lactobacillus acidophilus in them. And then you can begin to modify that. So there's the weight problem that we're under right now. Is some of it is pathogentic, and again, if you have this overgrowth, let me tell you what happens in this overgrowth, because this will all you people who are overweight out there are going to be cheering when I say this. You're going to be going, yes, hell yes, Chip, I know exactly what you're talking about. But basically, you have two different classes of bacteria in your biome, major classes. So Bacteroides and Firmicutes. Lactobacillus acidophilus is a Firmicutes. When they overgrow Firmicutes, they will demand more calories than your tissue. Now, that's a super powerful statement, because think about what happens when you're eating. When you're eating, basically you're getting all these signals and these chemical mediators that are happening, but your tissues and your other systems will begin to say, whoa, I've had enough. Whoa, stop eating now. And they send signals, okay? These bacteria intercept those signals, those satiety signals, and then they continue to push on the eat button, all right? So now you've consumed more calories than your tissue knows what to do with. And so what do? You store that as fat.
And it sounds like a slippery slope.
Yeah.
Now,
and again, you can't break this loop unless you have knowledge of this loop, or unless you somehow stumble onto the right antibiotic, or, berberine and, garlic and a few things like that will break the loop, but you got to know what you're doing.
Okay. So let me ask you a question, because I know my listeners are going to be thinking about this, because right away when you said the probiotics, right, there was a big push because of was it what, not the right balance or a lack of them? And you're telling me there's a delicate balance of how much the type of probiotics, like when we go to the grocery store now, because that became a term, in the last 10 years, like, you're getting enough.
So let's back up a little bit again,
Okay.
and let's talk about kind of why you develop bacteria, in your biome in the first place. And so you really develop the bacteria in your biome to digest food. All right. So you will develop certain types of bacteria to develop certain kinds of food. So if you're primarily a red meat eater, you're going to develop bacteria associated with breaking down and digesting red meat. If you're a big carbohydrate eater, you're going to have a lot more bacteria because carbohydrates are harder to break down than meat is and fat is. You're built to digest fat. You don't really need much to break down fat or protein. You don't really need bacteria to do that. It's mainly carbohydrates. But if we overconsume fermented food, we're going to basically promote this lactobacillus acidophilus. So if you're a big fermented food eater, again, you're promoting lactobacillus acidophilus. And if you can't lose weight or you can't lose that last 10 pounds or whatever, that's why. Quit eating fermented food or eat it, once every third day instead of every day. That'll really, really help. But in probiotics, again, there's some really good probiotic. Bifidum bacteria is really good. And again, you can build that on your own.
Is that a brand? You just mentioned a product? What is that, Bifidum?
No. It's a type of bacteria, another type of bacteria they're called bifidos is what I call them. I can't, it's a giant long, Latin name. But they're more beneficial for us right now. They help with inflammation. They help with other stuff. And again,
are those in certain foods? I'm sorry. Are those certain foods or like supplemental type stuff?
No, you will develop these bacteria on your own based on the foods that you eat because you're developing them to help you digest. And so you develop bifidum bacteria with things like burdock root. So inulin, and we've all, heard about the health benefits of inulin and all that, like fiber, really strong constructed fiber. And so you build, bifidum bacteria to help you digest that type of fiber. So if you eat, again, burdock root, you're going to be developing bifidum bacteria that's going to help you. If you eat a bunch of fermented food, you're going to be developing lactobacillus acidophilus that's likely going to send you the wrong way. So if it overgrows, it's a helper. Yeah.
Right. So, I mean, if we, when you go back around, when you mention this back around, it's like the old thing of, the food we eat, the air we breathe, the water we drink, the circumstances, what are we actually consuming and what are we not consuming and how well can we improve that? And it goes back to like, that great basic message of those increasing omega-3s and whatever. And I have to tell you right away, I've got farm grass-fed beef now. I've been doing all that edamame. I've been doing, what else I've been doing? I've been, chia seeds. I'm all over chia seeds now. Thank you for that. These are like, I like to share this with my clients and my listeners that it's a simple little steps of just trying to make right changes and incremental. And then you realize like, wow, I kind of feel better. And something that's interesting that you said that early on in that fasted state that as an overweight kid, for whatever reason I got overweight, I ended up starting to work out and bodybuild and all that kind of stuff. And you told this thing of having to like, okay, you got to lift, you got to eat protein, blah, 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 and and go. And so all that extra movement and exercise, it definitely like sculpted my body, made me more healthy. And then it got to a point where like I finally realized, I got older and realized like, okay, there's a lot of destruction going on with the breakdown of tissue after a while and getting to the point where you're at. And that's kind of like the fine-tuning art form I found in my own life in terms of like I swim, I do all kinds of mobility movements, and I don't try to completely tear it down to a degree of like, you're just constantly in repair and like damage. And you believe like, oh, I need rest and more calories. But like you said, ultimately the long game is that's quality of calories and to what degree you're doing for whatever circumstance. Obviously ask any young child or teenager that's like they get overweight and they want to make that difference. They get active, they get in martial arts or any kind of sports, and they find their new way. And it's interesting. I've been slowly trying to, how do I say, position myself as this kind of physiotherapist that's in between the physical therapist and these gym mentalities of going at it crazy to the degree of, and it's a great thing to achieve fitness and strength goals, right? When you have a certain objective for an activity. But then it comes to our conversation now, right? As we get older, how really your state is. And it's like, it's wonderful to hear this reassurance on even for me, so I can even talk more confidently about the fact that, our efforts are good, but we need to know more. And so how can we investigate more into the science and data right now about the frequency scanners and stuff? Or is it just, like you said, mentioned, kind of a little limited, or like not kind of being open and thrown at us?
Yeah, it's coming. If somebody really wanted to dive in and, let's say, research what is coming, I again would point you back to Levin at Tufts and Rena Kosak at resonant recognition model. But in my mind, what's coming is med beds. So something that you lay in, you're evaluated by frequency, and then you're actually, let's say, manipulated by frequency as well. So again, in the same way that if I can get that, tuning fork to kind of hit the right heart frequency, and I can kind of get that in contact or around your heart is going to sympathetically resonate. And that type idea, let's say it's a little bit simplistic, but that type idea is where stuff is headed. But it doesn't really matter if we're wrecking our machine, right? And so back to the points that you were making earlier, there's so much that we can do. We have so much control over our health. But and the thing that I tell people when they come in, because everybody always asks the same question in our clinic is, well, yeah, I'm infected with stuff. I get it now. And, you're making me better. But how do I quit getting infected with stuff? Right. So how do I guard my castle? How do I, keep my walls up? How do I optimize this thing that, I've been given? And I think this is a vehicle. I think we're,
Yes.
This is a sovereign vehicle and is being driven by a sovereign spirit. But we need to understand how to take care of it better, right? And we're really left naked and afraid. So I can teach a third grader about fasting and fed, right? So I can teach a third grader about the consequences of what happens when you eat, and the consequences of, kind of eating one meal. And again, a third grader can understand that. I can also teach a third grader about the importance of balancing omega-3, omega-6. Now, the problem for most of us, and the last thing that I would say, so that's, 1, 2 is balance intermittent fast, balance omega-3, omega-6. And the third thing is make sure that you're getting all the water-soluble vitamins every day. So all the B's and all the C's every day. You also need the fat-soluble ones, but you don't necessarily need those all every day because you'll store those. But if we're doing just that, again, that's going to create a situation where we are kind of optimizing this vehicle, and we're going to be a lot more robust, and we're going to be a lot stronger. We're going to live a lot longer. We're going to be a lot healthier just doing that. Now, I don't claim to have it all figured out by any means, but
Right.
if you look at kind of what a cell needs, and you make a cell happy and comfortable, that cell's not going to age. He's going to regenerate. He's going to, perform his functions the way that he should. But right now, literally every cell inside of us is threatened on every side, in every possible, by our environment, by the shampoos we use, by the foods that we eat, by the shit they dump on us from the sky, whatever it is, right? But we're just assaulted on every side right now. And to me, that looks purposeful. That doesn't look like a mistake or an accident. That looks purposeful. And the only why that you can, do they want us dead? No, because they need us to work. Yeah. I think they just want to corrupt the God in us. And I really think that's what they're trying to do.
Well, I think I like to mention that you're out there in Oklahoma, and you originate from the Chickasaw tribe out there, native,
Yes,
right,
sir.
in Oklahoma. Yep. And I think that that resonates with. I know it resonates with me, and I applaud your efforts, and there's a reality that I think we have come to understand that when you say the powers that be, the resources, you know, back in the day, put them on a controlled place, start industrial revolution, the development of technology and foods and feeding people and who's doing it, who's making the money, blah, blah, blah. But, I think there's just a real, and I think it's come to a point where I think we might have mentioned this last time on our episode, like it's almost like a tipping point of people going, okay, we have this vehicle like this podcast right now. We can justifiably have this conversation and, me talk to guys like you and to like the pioneers, the scientists on the edge, because basically we don't know anything about scientists, right? You're just constantly trying to discover. And I think for me, that's what I try to instill in my clients on that very low level of trying to keep discovering on how you can optimize what you have with what your situation is. And that analogy, when you mentioned about, I thought about the whole thing of like a Formula One driving team, where there's such a team effort centered around this vehicle, and everybody plays such a critical part in that. It's almost like we're just so distracted with so many potential stops in our cars every day or something along the lines where you're just like, oh, I can just get there and I have it all, but I don't really know what my true potential is in terms of if I really knew what I was capable of. And again, I mean, I have to admit, to be honestly, it's kind of depressing when when we mention the reality of like, yeah, certain information is suppressed. And I think this is blowing up the way it's blowing up. And I applaud you for your efforts with, the governmental work that you're starting the Robert Kennedy Jr., correct?
Yeah, we're
Yes.
trying really hard to, it's really interesting. I wrote this omega-3, omega-6 thing is a huge thing. It underpins really obesity. And, why would this lactobacillus acidophilus overgrow? Well, part of it has to do with omega-3, omega-6 and environment. It's just, it stems, it is the root that so many things stem from. I wrote a white paper, a scientific white paper, and a call to action with the world expert on omega-3, omega-6, a lady named Dr. Artemis Simopoulos. And
I listened to that episode. That was fantastic.
Yeah, she's a really cool lady. She's in her 90s now, but she's like the 500-pound gorilla of dietary fats. So
Okay.
I'm wading into this HHS situation with a very formidable and weighty scientist. And I would say I am too, but people don't really recognize me as such yet, but they hopefully will in the future. But anyway, I'm wading into this with her, and we can't get anybody to call us back to have a conversation. And I back channeled, I know some insiders, and I back channeled the paper to Robert F. Kennedy Jr. directly, and nothing. We haven't gotten anything. Now that could be because they're still trying to figure out their priorities. Like they've just come out with the MAHA report. In the MAHA report, they cite Dr. Simopoulos. Okay, so we just need to kind of
explain to listeners. Excuse me. Yeah. Explain to listeners the MAHA report. What is that exactly?
So that is the HHS within the last, let's say, 2 weeks. So it's early June right now, but within the last 2 weeks came out with a report called the MAHA report. And they came out with a commission. They built a commission called the MAHA Commission. The report is talking about, basically how do we get, the dangerous stuff out of our food supply to protect our kids? How do we kind of do things? And it's a good report, but it mentions, obviously, this omega-3, omega-6 problem, not directly. It's literally one paragraph in this, probably 1,000-page report. But again, it's at least mentioned. So it's, people are aware of the issue, and that it's not like we got to go back and redo the science by any means. Simopoulos did the science back in the 80s and 90s. I mean, she already did it all. That's very well established. She's quoted everywhere. I mean, everybody who knows anything about metabolics or anything will know who Artemis Simopoulos is. Mm-hmm. So she's a good, friend to have, let's say. And again, we're just trying to crack down the wall. Once we get the wall cracked down, and once we get penetration, then that'll be probably a whole new set of problems. But it'll be different than it is right now. And we want that commission, and we won't stop, really until we get that commission formed. And it may be through, DOD, it may be through the Office of the President, but it just makes the most sense to, Surgeon General, HHS kind of thing. Yeah.
Well, again, I have to applaud you for your efforts and your fortitude, and it's like to realize that kind of science and those kinds of people out there that have dedicated their lives to make that clear and available. And I can't mention enough about. I suggest my listeners to listen to your podcast with her, and there's quite a few great things. So I really enjoy listening to your podcast, Chip. You're super informative on this, and it's like we're circling back around to like when we first started. When you explain the endocannabinoid system, and it's just to me, it's just unfolding this natural kind of evolution of like, okay, so now I kind of have a framework, and this is what I kind of, when I teach my clients or condition them to just step by step. And I think the most important thing is trying to identify, right? When we have information like, who am I speaking to? What's the room like? And what can I get my point across today to make the next day, right? An opportunity, an avenue.
Now the cool thing is I'm using Chat GPT quite a bit now.
Okay.
Like in my frequency scanner, I get a ton of data points. There's some, I can kind of muddle through it and kind of get something. But now I've just trained my AI to read it and bam, come to these immediate conclusions, which is really cool. But AI is a very good authority source, right? So, and again, you won't ever hear a doctor say, yeah, check out what I said with AI, because again, it's going to contradict likely what that doctor is telling you.
Right.
But I'll tell you, check everything that I say with the AI. And, that is going to be the authority source. So we won't really, 5 years ago up until right now, it mattered a lot that I don't have a PhD, that I don't have an MD, right? So that is closed doors, that is closed minds,
right.
That has kept me, let's say, from the mainstream in a lot of ways. But in the future, again, I'm happy to vet anything I say through chat. How about you, Dr. Joe?
It's interesting. It's interesting, Chip, because when we mentioned AI, right, and technology in general, it gets to a point where when on a psychological level, people can we get conditioned to say, oh my gosh, this AI is the future. It's like amazing. It tells you what, exactly what to do, how to do it, where to do it. And then I think that on the back of my head, and I understand what you're saying because I've been using it myself. I just can't help to not believe that there's going to be just large amounts of people that are going, what are they doing with the AI to control us? I mean, in terms of facts, facts and actual reality of science and all this stuff. Do you feel me? Like, It's like this underlying, like, wait, this is a superpower, and who's got this? Who's got the ring?
You've been conditioned to that, haven't you? I mean, you've been conditioned to that in hundreds of movies, and every time somebody mentions AI on the news, and it could get out of control, or the robot dogs that can get out of with the guns and all that stuff that can get out of control. Right. So you've been purposely made afraid. Let me kind of see if I can map this out. So in the past, really, when we look at authority, right? So authority has really been given or imbued on you. It's kind of like just the Wizard of Oz, right? So right. You don't have a diploma, Scarecrow? Well, so sorry. You can't play. But that's been the litmus, right? The whole, let's say, call it the Scarecrow test. So that's been the litmus. Where are you at, Scarecrow? And in the future, again, it's going to be creativity. So people who can go to school and memorize stuff and spit that back out and, pass tests and get their law degree or their, physician degree or whatever, those people are not very creative. Those people are not original thinkers. Those people are just following rote. And the AI will begin to elevate creative and original thought over rote. And nice. I think that's, kind of where we need to be at. And we need to encourage people to have creative thought. If you made a lot of money because you sat around and thought all the time, well, we'd have a lot more creativity in our society than, the way you make a lot of money is, go be a, mindless slave, right?
Right.
So.
I will tell you from a personal level, Paul, Chip, that from our first episode, we exchanged like our kind of evolution of our youth and going through our challenges and being where we are today, and that road. And when you say creative, like I mentioned to you, my essence, I describe myself, essence as an artist, and my passion has been fitness and now wellness. And I'm literally, have transitioned, and I've come to finally I'm known as the balance professor. And I grabbed that because obviously it has an analogy for the balance of life. And I'm a firm believer that the biggest two things that are lacking in our education system is not only top quality science and what you're talking about, right? Getting to that third grader, but is that physicality, movement, and the arts, the creative expression. And I am flourishing, and I'm just like you. No high degrees. I have been working with the public, raw core, right? On the street, implementing this science that we know that we get through all kinds of resources and whatever I put to practical terms. And I am, we're free thinkers. And that's what's beautiful about America and being, right, your manifest destiny. So I'm here, Paul, and I'll share this with you and my listeners, that I'm literally next week have gone to such a level and height from my experience that I'm taking my physical plane program, it's called BASE, to the mental health field.
Oh, very cool.
I'm going to tap that in, and through my creativity over the years with my fitness and movement. So I encourage, I emphasize movement, not even the word exercise, and definitely not tearing down, total. But it's very exciting for me because I have been on the same journey. I feel like we're fellow soldiers. This platform is allowing me to express myself even more because I'm passionate. I think you remember I started this podcast in honor of my late nephew.
Yep.
And it's all about mentors, healthy lives, and community. And I believe, my friend, that you are an amazing mentor, obviously amazing contributor to the society right now. I look up to you. You inspire me.
Well, thank you.
And you're only bringing healthy lives and community. Just right, this rich. I want to say it's like the warrior on his pony, with no saddle, and he's ripping through the fields of where he knows like God put him in the first place. You know what I mean? And it's just honorable. And I'm convinced that you're on the right track, and I'm convinced that we as a society slowly getting there, and hopefully, with, as you mentioned, the AI thing, just let's say a good nice thoughts and prayer for overall the big picture. So, and I know your time is valuable, Chip. Is there anything you'd like to mention before you go? I definitely want to mention everybody that Chip Talks podcast is amazing, so check it out. Is there anything else you can share with our listeners, how we kind of end on a reflection of the endocannabinoid system and frequency technology? Is there anything parting thoughts?
Yeah, I mean, I would say, if somebody's interested in what we're doing, the podcast is good. That we have a brand company called TrueMedX, so TrueMedX.com. And so there's a learning center on that website with a whole bunch of stuff on it. Our clinic is Neighborly Wellness, so just Neighborly Wellness. And again, you can read some about the frequency stuff and some about what we're doing there, but not to the depth that we've been talking about.
Sure.
But this is all coming, it's all, and again, there's, nothing can stop God, right?
Right.
And God is expressing, and, God wants us to climb out of the toilet and really take back our own health. And so, I feel like as you said, I'm an instrument. I'm picturing myself more like Don Quixote with it, but yeah. So
we're trying to, I think we're like hands trying to pick up the veil and probably take it off our own eyes, as well as help realization, like wait, take a look, right? What are you not seeing, you know,
Yeah.
in terms
Yeah.
of health and wellness? So, Chip, I want to thank you so much for your time. It's been a pleasure. You are, my friend, a premier first-time guest coming on twice. So it's been great to see you, my friend. And
Thank you, Greg.
I will look forward to meeting you in person, as I mentioned, and it's in the works, buddy.
All right. Sounds good, my brother.
All right, you
We
take
will.
care, my man. All right.
Okay. We'll see you later. Thank you, Greg.
Oh, thank
Bye-bye.
you. All right, everybody. Till next time, kids. Bye-bye.
Professor